Baby boomers, we actually have an anniversary this year because at the end of 2024, every baby boomer will hit the age of 60. So it's the end of an era, end of a generation, but also the end of a cycle that opens us up to the next iteration of our lives. In today's show, what I'm going to be doing is sharing some insights from Saturn, the teacher within the zodiac, in terms of who is it that we as baby boomers need to become as we move into our third act of life, particularly because Saturn returns to the sign in which you were born. So those of you born in 1964, which is the last year of baby boomers, would have been born into Saturn, into Pisces. And you've had a 30-year journey when Saturn first had its return when you were 30 years old, and now you're entering the second Saturn return as you approach 60. So in today's show, I'll be sharing insights. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Bybreen and I help baby boomers reinvent themselves psychologically, practically, and technically so they can thrive in their third act of life. So here we are, a wonderful milestone. And Saturn, the teacher, the Lord of time, the Lord of maturity, and the Lord of lessons, revisits the world of baby boomers in particular. Why? Because, as I said, those born in 1964 by the end of this year will hit 60 years old. And so Saturn presents this wonderful opportunity to reflect on the last 60 years, and in particular, the last 30 years between your first Saturn return and the second Saturn return. And what could that actually mean? Well, let's look at some of the signifiers regarding Saturn. Saturn in the zodiac is there to show us what does leadership look like, but it's in different guises. As we've been growing through life, through our 20s, 30s, and 40s, there may have been this striving energy. And Saturn represents two signs, the first one being Saturn in Capricorn, the second, Saturn in Aquarius. Now, if we think about Saturn in the context of Capricorn, here it's the mountain goat who's struggling to get to the top of the mountain, wants a sense of external validation, recognition that you've achieved something. And as you're entering your 60th years, and for those of us baby boomers who are 60 and beyond, it's a moment for us to pause. Are we still in the energy of striving, grasping towards this sense of personal recognition? Is it a sense of, well, I'm 60 years old now, I don't have much time left? Is it a countdown season? Or is it there's a recognition that, okay, I've achieved whatever it is that you wanted to achieve, and you now have a new definition of what success could look like? So that's very much Saturn in Capricorn, the mountain goat that wants external recognition, validation about authority and power. Then we have Saturn in Aquarius, which by the time Saturn hits Aquarius and has moved through the zodiac, there is this sense of, well, who are you now that you have your identity as a leader in the world, or you have some level of accomplishment? And the lessons here are, well, how can I share that with other people? Because Saturn in Aquarius is about community, it's about groups, it's about others, it's about networks. So how could you use your authority in a way that empowers other people? Now that we have Saturn in Pisces, which will be there until about February 2026, so we've got a good 2 years left because it entered Pisces in the autumn of last year. Saturn in Pisces has a different tone to it. What it's inviting all of us to do, and particularly baby boomers, is to think of what are the emotions, what are the feelings that lie behind the external events that happen in our world. Saturn doesn't necessarily like being in water. It's in Pisces, so there's a diffusion of energy. And what Saturn is calling for here is, how are you able to let go of the grasp of your identity, your ego, this thing, this part of you that has shown up and has led your life for the last 6 decades. But actually, does it still have relevance as you cross the threshold of 60 and beyond? Do you still have this burning desire for accomplishments? Or are you ready to release your attachment to your ego, to your identity? Because Saturn in Pisces is calling for all of us, but particularly those baby boomers born in 1964, because they were born with Saturn in Pisces. So it's this contradiction, maybe, or maybe it's a paradox. The paradox being, have you elevated yourself to the point whereby there's no longer this external grasping? And you're now at the stage where you want to be turning your lens back into your own life. Why do I say this? Because Saturn in Pisces has traveled right around the zodiac. It spends about 2.5 to 3 years in a sign, which means that it's gone from Saturn in Aries through to Saturn in Pisces. And so it has arrived at this point. It's the 12th sign. And just think about it from the natural astrological chart. It's now in the 12th house. So it's the house of completion. It's also the house of undoing potentially, but also the house of isolation. It's the house where you need to come home to yourself. But what does coming home actually mean? Are you consciously using your energy now to avert your gaze? And so, therefore, it's a time for you to pause. Do you experience life whereby it always seems as if something out there is controlling your world? It's a sense of disappointment and frustration, because Saturn is fantastic at that. It brings us scenarios and situations for us to navigate, but it's also testing our sense of consciousness. How conscious are we of the behaviors that we have that potentially we act in a way that undermines us? Just think of the dreams that you have, the dreams you had. Now, did you act contrary to the thing that you were vocalizing? For example, I'm going to lose weight. I want to become X, Y, and Z. I want to set up my own business. Whatever the dream and desire is, you may have been externally verbalizing this, but internally, unconsciously, you have acted in ways that undermine the dream. So, therefore, it has never blossomed. Saturn in Pisces is now saying, okay, it's time to lessen the grip. Maybe the dreams that you had in the younger version of yourself, as you were moving through young adulthood, through to your first Saturn return, and then through your 30s, your 40s, and your 50s, are those dreams still valid? Are you sort of forcing yourself, shoehorning yourself into a dream that no longer fits where you are now? It's no longer appropriate for the stage that you're in now. Because what Saturn here wants you to do is to piece together your own mosaic. And it's not so much about you've learnt because other people have told you this is what should have happened. Saturn in Pisces is this wonderful welcome home to my own interpretation and understanding of life's vicissitudes has led me to the place where I now see I have these aha moments whereby that was the meaning of this particular uh, example, this particular event in my life that I can now make sense of. Because as you move through your 60s and beyond, once you've let go of the grasp of still wanting this external validation, now there's no problem necessarily with that, only if there is this deep hunger that you're still trying to force your identity, your way of being onto the world to have a sense of governance. Here, it's how do you navigate the maybe ending of a dream that no longer fits your life into the next iteration of a dream that could be more befitting to you, but also befitting to the wider environment, be that your networks, your friendship groups, family, and communities. Saturn wants you to grow up. but grow up in a way whereby you have reconciled those different aspects of who you are. And you're now ready to sacrifice your ego because it's been driven, it has led you, you have led it over the decades. And it's about how do you submit to this new era that is calling for a level of softness, because when we've got Saturn in Pisces, it's a water sign. So it's about how do we remove these boundaries? How do we remove these barriers in a way that lessens your sense of isolation, lessens your sense of loneliness, so that you're able to connect in a far more harmonious way. Saturn wants to take us on this particular journey. Now, for us as baby boomers, as we step in very proudly into our 60s, I turned 60 last August and just really love the pro aging process. We are living through an era whereby longevity, so we could be living longer beyond what was ordinarily identified as three scores and 10, which is 70 years old. We are living into our 80s, 90s, and possibly some of us will go into 100 and beyond. But that's if we have good health and, you know, we maintain a very healthy pro-aging life. But let's look from the point of view, let's say that we only have possibly another 20 years, 2.5 decades. Saturn in Pisces wants you to take a panoramic view of where you are now, what has brought you to this position, and how can you use it as leverage? It's soft power. It's not dominating power, but it's soft power whereby you can be easing into the next iteration of your life. Where is it that you could begin to live with more ease, more joy, where you're able to integrate fun in your life because you're no longer restricting yourself? Saturn in Pisces is an indication of blockages of what your soul really wants you to express. It's the expression of what you're holding back because you fear judgment, you fear criticism, you fear yourself. It's a sense of, well, if I step into the next iteration, if I'm being called to the next iteration of my life, am I ready? And I had a wonderful experience of this just last week. I met up with an old colleague. He was interested in engaging me with a piece of work. And beyond that, we had this wonderful conversation. He has built an incredible community and has a vision in terms of where he would like to see the community. However, Saturn does what Saturn does and throws up roadblocks, throws up distractions, throws up barriers. And we were going back and forth in the conversation as he was sharing particular things, and I was reflecting just my views. And there was a beautiful moment in our interaction where he said, "You know what, Bybreen, I'm afraid. I'm really afraid to step into the next iteration of my leadership because that would mean I have to let go of my perspective, my vision, my dreams, my goals that I have of this particular community. And I'm not sure if I'm ready to widen my horizons. I'm not sure if I'm ready. I'm not sure if I'm built and I'm capable of taking this community to the next level." Now, this was a beautiful interaction, and this was a wonderful demonstration of Saturn and Pisces, where there's the softening of leadership, there's the softening of identity. There is this sense of, I have placed barriers on myself because of my vision of what I think this community could be, should be, must be, which sounds very Saturn in Capricorn and possibly Saturn in Aquarius, through to this personal recognition of, who do I need to become? Am I skilled? Am I equipped to become this next iteration of my life? Do I want to? Am I still holding on to a dream that is now redundant? And these are some of the reflections that Saturn in Pisces wants us as baby boomers to have reconciled or are reconciling what appears to be disparate parts of our lives. Is it time now to let go of the infantile way of being that some of us may be still trying to project and impose on other people? through to, well, there's no separation. I'm looking for unity. Saturn in Pisces is about how do we unify ourselves? How do we unify the internal psyche, the soul, whereby we're trying to bring about a level of integration, a level of balance. And so, therefore, we have a wider viewpoint on what life is trying to teach us, what life is trying to show us, and how do we include wider society around this. Now, Saturn in the last two signs, i.e., Aquarius and Pisces, is very much about the collective. And Pisces in particular is the 12th sign. So it's the end of a cycle, but it's also the sign behind the ascendant, which is the beginning of a cycle. So it's a crossroads, but it only is a crossroads if you refuse to make a decision, if you refuse to step beyond the limitations of what Saturn might appear to be giving your life. It's like, oh, this thing has happened to me again. I've hit a roadblock, or I'm not quite seeing what lessons have I not learnt. And it reminds me of the myth of Parsifal and the Holy Grail. And he gets to the point where he's been asked questions, or he forgets to actually integrate the advice that was given to him. And Saturn in Pisces is very much about, what didn't I learn? What haven't I learned? What haven't I given myself the opportunity to learn? Where could I be less rigid? And so, therefore, I am now becoming more conscious about the decisions I make. I'm now choosing to live more consciously. I'm now choosing to raise my head above the parapet and let go of my rigidness around what I think life is trying to teach me, and just flow and be at ease with where life is trying to take you. So, baby boomers, congratulations to those of you who are turning 60 this year. It's the end of an era, and we have Gen X, which is behind us. That starts from 1965. And so it also is a sense of passing the baton on. We as boomers, from 60 upwards, we have generations behind us. And so what Saturn return is very much, it's returned back to its position. What have you learnt? But what have you actually learnt, as opposed to what have you read that you think fits you? One of the things that I find at times quite irritating, the internet is flooded with motivational quotes. You must do this and you must do that. It's a litany of them. And at times we don't need, I think the majority of times actually, we don't need motivational quotes. They sound good. We might have them all up around our home, or, in our vision book. But actually, it's about, how do we weave together? How do we knit together? How do we package our own mosaic of life? And in packaging and designing and creating, our own personal mosaic, we are able to see, we're able to discern, we're able to pull together, that was the lesson I was supposed to live with. That was the lesson I was supposed to learn. That was the lesson that I've now learned. And because I've now learned it, the external things like frustration and things not working out in your favor, maybe they were working out in your favor. And what Saturn was trying to teach you was to slow down. It was giving you delays. It was giving you roadblocks to say, can you rise to the challenge? And if you can rise to the challenge, who do you need to be? Also, maybe there's a delay because, is it time for you to pivot? Or maybe there's a delay because you need to develop something else within you. What is it that's unspoken in you that needs to be birthed? Saturn, on the one hand, has been heavily criticized for being the hard taskmaster. But Saturn is also one of our best friends within the zodiac. And as baby boomers, as we are transitioning, as we're moving into our third act, and we're trying to redesign, reposition, and reinvent ourselves, what do we hand? What's the baton that we all hand to the next generation? which means that it liberates us from me, myself, and I, because Saturn in Pisces is about the diffusion of that through to, okay, I have a new dream. Saturn is ruled by, sorry, not Saturn, Pisces is ruled by Neptune. So, therefore, what's the highest, most significant spiritualized dream that we can have that is imbued with compassion and sensitivity and built within that narrative is something that we can all, as baby boomers, hand on to the next generation of the generations beyond us. So there's greatness in Saturn in Pisces. Saturn in Pisces wants us to lessen the attachment and reposition ourselves into the collective story, the collective narrative. And boy, don't we need this. If we think from a film point of view, I'm somebody, I don't go to the pictures very often. I'm not a movie buff necessarily, but I have been more recently, I think in the last month, been to the cinema 3 times, and I'm going again tomorrow. And one of the films that I saw, I've seen it twice now, is One Love, the Bob Marley story. It's exquisite for so many reasons. But the title of it is One Love, which is very much about Pisces. Pisces is about how do we love each other? How do we embrace each other? How do we engage with each other? How do we bring up compassionate leadership? And as baby boomers, having lived for at least 6 decades, we're going into our 7th decade, that period of rumination. We still have desires, there's nothing wrong with that. But how do we blend our desire with our responsibility? What can we pass on? What is the baton? So, in closing out this session today, I want you to think about the relay that we're all running. You've got this baton in your hand, and this baton is imbued with wisdom and sensitivity. And it's inviting you to extract the nuggets, particularly over the last 30 years between the first Saturn return around 28 to 31 through to where we are now, 61-ish. What is contained in your baton? Think about any relay race, think about the Olympics or any other of the track events where we're handing over, we're passing on. What story can you pass on as a leader in your own life? And whether it's a leader of 3 people, whether it's your leadership at work, whether it's not so much you are given this title, how do you assume your own sense of leadership, but a leadership from the Lao Tzu perspective? And his style of leadership was, look what we've done. Saturn in Pisces is saying, look what we've done. And the Bob Marley One Love is the philosophical message is, if we come together, look what we can do. So that's it. That's what I wanted to share with you today. As baby boomers, we do have a responsibility, whether we choose to see it as a huge responsibility or a micro responsibility. But how I want you to think of the image, the baton that's being passed over. And it can start with the self. The baton of my ego drives me in this particular way through to the internal baton. How do I soften myself whereby I can feel part of the collective? So that's how we bridge the gap. We bridge the chasm between, this is who I've always shown up in the world as, and this is who I choose to be, through to the beautiful conversation that I had with an old friend last week, where it's about, you know what, I'm frightened, I'm fearful, I'm not sure, because if I give up this old dream, who do I need to become? So how do we share our internal baton? And then how do we hand that baton onto other people? So I'd love to hear your comments in the comment box below. Please put your comments there. Please like, share, subscribe, and invite other baby boomers. As you know, I'm here on a Sunday at 3:30, where the idea is that I share insights, wisdom, nuggets, information that can help baby boomers transition from where they are to live a far more fulfilling, integrated life. So they're upskilled and can thrive in their third act of life. I look forward to seeing you again next Sunday. Stay well and have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.